Hello, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name's Matt Lehman, and on this stream we work on Django apps. We're going to continue on my homeschooling app tonight and do some feature development. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around. And if you're catching this on YouTube later, please like, subscribe, comment, do all those things that makes YouTube happy, and that will help me be found by other people, and I would be greatly appreciative of that. There are plenty of ways you can get in touch with me. I've got a website that's linked above. And you can support me on Patreon if you are so inclined. I'm at patreon.com/mblehman. And I want to thank my patrons of Rupert, Andrew, Abdulaziz, Patrick, Mark, and Eric, and Philip. Thank you all for your support. I appreciate it. It really helps me put together some content for the community and cover some of those costs and stuff. So let's get into what we're going to focus on tonight. I have a tentative plan for something, but it's really at this stage nebulous in terms of the technical requirements that we're going to have to do, but we'll walk through the issue itself and then we'll look at the implementation. It's a new page that my customer, who as a reminder is my spouse as well, so she needs for her homeschooling activities, and it is a page to forecast out the completion dates or the projected dates for when a course is going to end. So knowing, is this course going too long? Is it not have enough in it? All of that sort of stuff, it needs to be figured out, and needs to have some data to determine when that's going to happen. And since the schedule from the app is entirely generated, it would be really helpful if there was a page that just said, hey, this course is going to end on this date. And probably at some point it would have some good feedback of saying, like, you said your school year is going to end on this date, and you've got this course that's going to end way beyond this, so you need to make some adjustments. And that's the kind of stuff that might be helpful to see in that sort of page. So that's the general plan. I don't know exactly how we're going to accomplish this off the top of my head, so it'll be an exploration, as some of these features are. Like this is just the customer request, and we're going to work through what it's going to take to make that work. So probably what we'll do is get a basic view in place that can render stuff. We'll look at some initial data that's going to be required to make this work, and then we're going to struggle through the actual logical changes that are required, because the way this is going to have to happen is each course is going to have to run through a calculation to say, is this course running? If so, how many days are in the course? How many tasks are available to that course? And all of the content that goes in there will be compiled together and to produce a full report. But we'll get there when we get a little farther along. Let's start with the basics and get the bones of this in place, and then we can flesh it out. So I'm going to go over to my terminal, and we're going to start. Where's the best place to start? The best place to start is probably the test case, to really do this from a test-driven development style, to give ourselves the scaffolding to make sure that what we're doing will work. And so I'm going to, first, I guess I should pause and say, like, this is about a school year. So my list of apps is accounts, courses, notifications, schools, and students and users that you can see from my terminal here. The most appropriate place where all of the school year related information is in the schools app. So this is going to be a page under that. So I at least know that much, which gives us the place to start, which is the schools tests test views file. And I'm going to come in here and see there's a couple of different kinds of stuff in here, so that I can't just drop it on the bottom, or I could, but then I'd get a little confused. There are places where these views focus on school years, and eventually I might break up this test case because it's already getting a little long here at 600 or 700 lines, but that won't be for today. But we have a set of reports here at the very bottom, so I don't want to put them there. So the best place for a test case is anywhere that actually talks about school years, and there's school breaks right there. So it looks like the last set of school year activities that's more break stuff. School breaks. I got a bunch of school break stuff there. Grade levels. All right, it's going to be maybe up higher than I thought it was. We'll find it. All right, here's the school year list view. So probably right here is probably appropriate. So as the last page for school year stuff, this is probably some signal to myself in the future that maybe there are too many responsibilities for this particular Django app. I'm not going to act on that tonight. We're going to keep it focused on this particular feature, but this is you should take the length of files as like potential code smells of here, maybe you're doing too much. Just like if you were to write a huge long function that's say hundreds or 100 lines long, that's probably too big. If you can't fit it on a screen reasonably to read the content, then that gets too big. And so the same pattern holds true with Python modules and test codes. And length is the more you have to keep in your head, the harder things are to comprehend, to design. And so use that as a signal to yourself to break things apart. So I'll maybe refactor that another day, but that's just a note for when you're thinking about designing stuff. So let's start with a test case as we would normally do. And we're going to call this the school year. And I had a discussion with my spouse about what this page would be called. And there's not a perfect word for it, but the best that we were able to come up with for the time being is a forecast. So we're going to call this the school year forecast view. And it is going to subclass from test case, as everything does in this app. And I'm going to start with this unauthenticated access thing. And what that's going to do is going to shake out getting ourselves a URL, getting an actual view set up, and just get us flowing there. This view is not going to have a bunch of user interaction. It's very much a query the database and do some calculations. So that's nice. It's going to be probably a template view that has some calculation that happens to generate the context. So it's in terms of interaction and all the different HTTP verbs to consider, there's not too much, which is good. But we still need something to start with. So we'll say the school year forecast, and I guess as I'm thinking about this URL, it has to be for a specific school year. So we can't just leave it as no parameter here. There's really there needs to be a parameter passed in. So we're going to need a school year, and I'm just going to steal this one that's right below here. And say we'll pass that in the exact same way that is shown in that view below, which is to say we're going to pass in the UUID as the parameter and say school year UUID. And so assert login required is going to take this information. It's going to do a reverse on that to try and generate the URL, and then do resolving on that to find the view. So these parameters are going to ultimately be required. So we need to put that in there to make the test work appropriately. Okay, so we've got our view name. We have the factory data to go from. But if we run this test, it's going to break because that view doesn't exist yet. So as predicted, there's a no reverse match on school year forecast. So the next thing we can do is go to the school's URLs file and put it in there. Just fill it in. And this is, where's the best place to put it? I mean, I guess we can put it just following the same sort of pattern. I don't know why I put the list view at the bottom. It's kind of curious. So there's a bunch of school year stuff. Here's one with a UUID, and here's the edit as well. And what the URL pattern itself is going to look like is very much like this, is the school years and then a UUID, and then instead of the word edit, we're going to use the word forecast. So I think the sensible thing to do is copy this and put it here and just use that as the template to put all this together. So we'll say forecast, and we'll change this to forecast, which I keep wanting to type for case. That's not right. And then while we're here, so now that we have put the view above the list, I think I normally put my test cases kind of in the same order. So the I suspect that well, here you caught me lying. I'm not actually telling the truth. Well, I am telling the truth. I typically try and do this, but we have found a case where I have not been consistent. So, where is the school year edit? So let's put it after this. Oh, it was the right spot. Okay, my brain just didn't see that properly, I guess. So we're going to plop it right down after the edit view, which comes right before the list test case. And now I believe this should resolve, and actually should pass, I would suspect. So it passed because it's really just piggybacking on top of the view configuration that we haven't changed in the URL. So if you were to visit this page today, this forecast page, it would be a clone of the edit page, because that's all we've changed is the URL pattern and the name of the view, or the name of the URL, excuse me. So the next thing I want to do is switch this to be from edit view to become a forecast view. And that's where my editor is going to start complaining and saying, like, wait a minute, that doesn't exist. You need to go create that. So if we try to run this test again, it's going to fail with a undefined attribute error that says that this view is not in the module. So we'll keep doing some error-driven development, and we'll now go over to the views file, and we'll find that same school year edit view. And it's not going to be an update view. This one's going to be a straight up template view. But we can take this, at least the top class part, and plop it there. And we'll change template, the update view to template view. And then we'll drop in a template name that for a template that doesn't exist yet. And I should add, I forgot to mention that if you have any questions, feel free to ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. That's really what I'm here for. We're looking at a particular feature tonight, but I'm happy to answer questions as they pop up. But I want to get that out there in case others join into the stream later so they can see that comment there. Okay, template name. Template is going to be in the schools area. And what is the pattern that I've been using for school year stuff? So there's a no underscore. Might have done that. Why did I do that? Oh, I think because it tries to use the default name that Django wants to generate. So that's fine. I'll keep following that pattern. And we'll come down to this area and we'll say schools and school year forecast HTML. So far, whoops, that's an edit view. We gotta change that name to forecast. There, I did it again, for case. All right, now this view should pass. And it's surprising because the template doesn't exist yet, but it's because this particular test, what it's testing for is the access control stuff. So it's really testing, is this login required mixin added to the view at this point? And it's not actually getting down to the part where it's going to render. So the fact that the template doesn't exist yet is inconsequential. So the next thing we want to do is make an actual call, and we'll copy from this test below here, and we're just going to test the happy path scenario, and we'll say that we want to change the URL to be forecast and pass in the same stuff we had above, UUID equals school year UUID. So this test is where we should see the failure happen, and the template's going to not be there, so it's going to blow up and say, I don't know what this is, you don't have this template. So now we need to go fix that part. So we'll come up to this particular split, and we'll go to our templates and say schools, and we'll look for which one should we take? We'll take the school year detail as the starting spot and copy all of that. It's not going to be fully what we want, but it's a good starting point. And then we can say school year forecast, HTML, and paste all that in there. And I still don't know if it's going to pass because there might be some context data that this particular template is expecting that is not going to be provided by this view. So we'll try and run it and see what happens. It may fail. Yeah, it failed because we passed it a parameter that for something that wasn't there. So no surprise, we'll have to find that particular chunk that is looking for the school year detail. And it's because we don't have that in the context. Actually, you know what, maybe better yet, maybe we just fill in the context because we're definitely going to need the school year in the view to display some of that information. So might as well make the test pass and on that part. So let's leave the template alone and go back to the view. And we're going to we need more context. So we'll take this get context data method, and we're going to extend it and say return context. And so that's that part. Let's close the template so we give ourselves more room for now. And so we have to get the school year in here. So there's probably a school year query that we need to do. Here's the query in factory here. But this is a different kind of view that Django provides, where you just provide the query set and it's going to give you the actual data. And I don't know that that's a good fit for this particular template view, because what we're really interested in rendering out to the user, yes, there's information about the school year that's going to be part of that, but a list view and a detail view that come from Django, some of the generic views, they're intended to be very much about whatever that particular data model is, that resource. So the school year list view is all about show me stuff about a listing of school years. This forecast, though, it's about the school year, but the data that is going to be displayed comes from very different areas. We have to get the enrolled students for the school years and loop through each of those students and loop through the grade level that they're a part of and the course. So the data that we're really going to display in this view is very deep into the hierarchy of information that is associated with the school year. So the school year is just one piece of the puzzle. So I don't want to use a detail view for that, because it's a pattern that we'd be shoehorning this view into a detail view when that doesn't really fit. So we'll paste in this chunk of code here to get the user, and we want to do a filter, and we want to get the we actually want to do a get here. So really what we're looking for is, we don't care about a list. So this list view is just doing a query set for all of the things that user owns, and that's not accurate. That's accurate for that view, but not this one. So what we're really desiring is to pull out the school year object, and it's still not accurate yet because we're doing a filter here. So filter is going to return a query set, which would be an iterable that you could pull out multiple school years, but we're interested in an individual one. So what we're truly after, and let's see if we have another example in here. If I can type the pattern correctly. Oh my goodness. Yeah, here it is. And in fact, this is probably the exact chunk of code that we want. So what we're doing is instead saying that we're going to use a get object or 404 pattern. And this is actually going to trigger another test that we need to write to make sure that some other user in the system cannot access this school year. I try and put those tests on all of my code to give me the confidence that I'm not letting data leak through. If I was to ever mess up the view, there's always a test there to make sure that this is accurate. But it's pulling out the school year. It's filtering on the school year who's the admin of the school it belongs to, which should be the user. And it's taking the UUID parameter that's provided, and it's stuffing that information into the context. The only part that's a little off on this is if we're going to continue to reuse the template, it's going to go in as school year with no underscore. So I'm going to try rerunning this test now and see if that passes or not. All right, so now we've got a passing test because that means that the context data was there and the URL call worked appropriately because it actually had a value instead of a none. And so we're now ready to add the other test that does the proper permission check to make sure that we're keeping ourselves honest. I'm sure there's plenty of examples here. Here's one. But I don't want to use the list view. I keep trying to use that list view, and that's not good. So we want this to 404 if it's somebody else's thing. So this is the right test, but we just need to adjust it to fit the view that we're working on. So a user cannot view the forecast of another user's school year. That's the doc string that we want. So we've got school year factory. It's not taking a user parameter. So that tells me that it's somebody else's school year. And so we want to now change this to school year forecast. So the way this test is working is we're authenticating. We're using this login call to log in as the one particular user that's created. And then we're trying to access this school year of something that's generated by the factory. And because we provided no arguments to it, that school year that will be generated will get a different user. And so when we try to do this get call on it, it should hit this and do a get object or 404. And since the school year filter is not going to produce any results for this UUID, it'll 404. So this test should succeed, and it does. Okay, we've got our school year. Maybe now is a good time to like pause with this thing and actually go check it out. I also need to think about where to put this as a link. Like, how would you get to it? I think probably the most appropriate place is going to be on the school year detail page to say, like, okay, you're looking at the school year, now you want to look ahead. Maybe there's also an argument to put it on a reports page in the future too, but we're going to start with the school year detail page because that's, the user will be like right there looking at that details, and they might want more context at that time. So let's go modify that template to give us a link to it so we don't have to navigate directly to this. And then we can click on it and see how it's going to be a copy of the detail page initially, and then we can start tweaking that template till it gets into shape of what we want it to be. So I'm going to go to the school year detail page, and we're just going to have to see this. Let's fire up the local server and take a look. If we return to the app and go to the school year, this is where we have to figure out where to put this. I'm also going to have to modify my school year again in a little bit because I'm running out of months. I've been using the same test school year on my local account for quite a while, and it's useful because it's got a bunch of data in it, but I'm going to need to make some kind of tool that can generate a new one quickly because the window of this stuff moves over time. Anyway, here we are at the school year detail page, and we can see it says, when it runs, we can probably, I'm trying to avoid, and I've actually been thinking about this recently, is there are these handful of buttons here, and they're pretty large buttons. And it works when there's a limited number of these buttons. But it starts to get kind of goofy looking when, I mean, even this having 3 buttons here is sort of pushing it. And I haven't really figured out what is going to be an appropriate UI for these kind of pages when they begin to have more features. Like the way this is structured so far, and the aspects that I like about it is that there's a very clear H1 tag of here you are. You're looking at this particular school year. It gives you the date range. And then it gives you some details about the school year, which I think is also important to get like a bird's eye view of what's the thing that I'm looking at. What I'm less sure about is the interaction patterns to work with this, because a lot of this page is about viewing information about, okay, these are my courses, and this is very much a kind of situational awareness. I see all the things that I want to do, but at the same time, it very quickly flips into, you can see these little edit icons all over the place, and there's links all over the place that take you. So it's a jumping off point. So I'm just trying to strike the balance of what is a reasonable amount of data to show, and then for what I have at the top here of these kind of global interactions for a school year, what happens when there's too many of them? And I'm kind of leaning right now is for this forecast view. Here we're talking about the school year range, so maybe it makes sense to have another sentence here and kind of be natural. Hey, Coatlim, welcome back. Thank you. Good to see you. Maybe it makes sense to have another sentence to carry on with this that has the link to the forecast be just something that you can click on at the time, and flow in this rather than calling it out as a specific piece of UI. And then if it doesn't come out well, then we'll fix it. But we need to start with something. So let's go to this area that's right after school year started. Where am I? Okay. It's because I have logic on here. So I tried to search for school year started, and there's more logic in this than even dawned on me. Okay, for the moment, we'll just say we'll put in the href. We're going to give this a class of an underline, so it will appear as a link. And we'll say href equal, URL, and then schools. And this is the school year forecast. And we need to pass it the school year UUID. So this will make the link work, assuming I type the template tag correctly. And we'll say view school year projected, projected completion dates. We'll wordsmith that later. And we'll make that whole thing a big link. So now if we refresh the page, it should appear. Okay. So already this is having effects that I didn't anticipate. I didn't realize that this particular box, I figured I would have constrained the width of this thing, and it's pretty evident that it's not. It's spanning the entire distance. And so it looks, I don't know, it looks reasonable, but maybe it's just an adjustment that I need to get used to. Or maybe it's a sign that like this isn't the best place for that. How about, what if we put it, because I mean, it does, as I'm looking at this, it doesn't really fit here. This is a piece of information. Here's the date range. So, you know, why would you want to click on something that's unrelated to the piece of information that was listed here? What if, for the time being, we just put another paragraph in there and move it to a paragraph on its own? Let's see how that looks. And this is a MB. We need to change that to a 2. And then we can take the link and move it down. Okay. So now the way I'm looking at this is these 3 buttons are, the user wants to change the data. The user wants to add a grade level or add a break or modify their school year. And this link is very clearly saying like, well, this is something else. This is like, you're going to go to a different page. So I'm going to click this, and what you're going to see is it's going to look identical because we're using the same template. Oh no, we used a different one. Okay. Oh, we didn't have all the context here, so that's good. So it's looking a little bit like it can't find the grade levels, and so it looks a little weird here because all the context is here. But we're going to rip all this stuff out anyway. What we really are wanting to do is it's going to be mostly the same as what's here. In fact, I probably use the same title format and put another caret here and then say forecast after that to show that it's on that particular page, and then rip out all this other stuff because we don't need it. So let's do that. We've got let's move to the forecast page, and we're going to get rid of this trial banner, which I think gets rid of the account tags. So I'm not going to go into all that right now. This is something that only appear on the first time. And here we go. We've got, so let's start by putting the SVG after it here. And I'm going to update this to say forecast. You're not going to see that because it's in the title, but I can see it. So that's been modified. It's in the title area, which is the tab on the stuff at the top of the browser. And we've got the caret here, which looks awkward right now. So let's put in the anchor, the text that goes after that. And that should be, I guess, a span tag. I don't even know that we need a span tag. Well, let's put it in a span anyway. Kind of gives us a container if we wanted to change the styling of it in the future. So there, forecast. For the rest of this stuff, I might leave one of those paragraphs around for the moment. And are there going to be any actions on this page? I don't think so. I think it's going to be purely informational. So I think we can get rid of all of the buttons that exist, which start here. So those are gone. We refresh. Goodbye buttons. And then there's not going to be any grade levels to display, I don't think. So this detail view is actually, it's one of the core views in the app. So it has a lot of information in the context, which is why there's so much in here. I mean, it's a pretty big template file that's rapidly shrinking as I'm chopping it down. And yeah, this, I think we can get rid of all this stuff. There's probably some things in there that would be useful to keep, but I'm just going to chop them all out for now. So what that leaves us with is very little. Just the information about the school year that we had earlier, which again, I'm not going to repeat, but I wanted to have a paragraph tag that I could use. So actually, why don't we just clear it out? We'll have an empty paragraph tag so it shall no content for initially. Okay, so we have our blank canvas, if you will. And I think we're ready to talk about what information has to go in here. So there's another page that I'm thinking of that we'll probably need to use or refactor logic out of in order to make this page work. If I go into the week view and I look at this student, Mark, and I click on Math 2, this is the student's view of this particular course. So the course has, 100 tasks, and Mark has completed 50 of them, let's say. And based on where the school year is, how many does Mark have left to do? And so it does that calculation. And so the important part right here is this column of planned completion dates. What is important from my perspective is this date right here. So all of these tasks exist in this course, and Mark has done very few of them in this test account, and you can see that it is expected to go all the way out until July 9th. And this is a good example of how this would be a problem in real life, because I don't know if you noticed earlier, but the test school year is projected to end in April. So if something said you've got until July 9th, or it's going to take until July 9th and your school year ends in April, you're in pretty big trouble. So what really we are trying to capture on that forecast report is not any of these intermediate dates. Those are not important. There can probably be links to this particular page so that the user can drill into that and figure out why is it that this is taking so long. But I want to have a view that is essentially show each student, show all the courses that they are in for that grade level that they're part of, show the date of when they're expected to complete it for each one. And I think that's the initial version of this. And those dates that are going to be on there are, again, this last date. So the question is, what code is generating this plan stuff? And can I jump straight to the final answer? I don't know that I can. So we might have to make some methods that do this. It should probably take a few minutes to look at this code. It's been a while since I've actually looked here, so I honestly don't even remember how I'm calculating this off the top of my head. But it's very important for all of this scheduling logic to be consistent, and the best way to be consistent is to use the same code. And that means, if this code is in this particular view, it needs to be refactored and extracted into a place where it can be commonly used by this new view that we're making as well. So that's the path that I think I have to walk down in order to not put myself in a bind later when I've got mismatching code and different scheduling logic. So let's leave the template alone for now, and let's go look at the student course view to see how that thing is calculating the projected dates. So we've got the students views file. I'm going to search for course. I think there's the only one in here, and see what it's doing. And yeah, sadly, I put all this logic right into the view, which is fine when you're starting, but it just means that I have created work for myself now. So I'm going to take a minute and try and understand what's here. So the crux of this particular view that we care about anyway is this part right here, what it's calling get task items. Matt, I didn't even put a doc string. Wow. So I'm really not helping myself out here. So it takes a student and the course. That's reasonable. That's information we're going to be able to get, because we're going to be able to query the school year and say, give me the student and all the courses they're in. And it takes the current time And looks like there's even some edge cases that we'll have to factor in. There's a lot here. It determines if the course is running. Oh man, let me check out. That might not even be the right thing to check for anymore either. Yeah, bummer. This is I think this view is actually broken in ways that, so there's a change that I made recently to the modeling of including this isActive field on the model. And the isActive field is what it sounds like. It determines whether the course is something that appears on the schedule or not. So let's say you're building out a school year and you have a course that you only plan to run in the second half of your school year. You can mark a course as inactive and it won't appear on your schedule until you're ready for it to appear. This view over here is not factoring that information in. So it is going to calculate a projected completion date even if a course is inactive, and that's inaccurate. So we got to fix that too. That's a bug in there. It's the challenge of changing your data model. It's like sometimes the code doesn't keep up with your model. I'm smiling because my wife is sitting right there and she's giving me goofy looks about my stuff. So that's what's going on. Okay, so we've got this chunk of looping logic, and it's doing quite a lot here. And so what I think the impact of this potentially is that this forecast view might be doing a ton of logic. Hopefully it's not doing that many queries. In fact, let's figure that out. Let's see what happens if we try and look at this individual page and see how many queries that's running, and that would be a good approximation. We can multiply that by the number of courses to see if this other one is going to run a lot as well. So I'm going to reload this page with the debug toolbar and refresh it, and here we are. We've got the debug toolbar. Oh, this is only doing 10 queries. That's actually not nearly as bad as I thought. This is pretty snappy. Okay. And if we do an appropriate select related to get all of the courses and prefetch, we might be able to get away with this new view doing only like 11 or 12. I won't hold my breath, but we can hope. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out the appropriate next best step. Is it to refactor? It's probably to refactor this, but where do I want this code to live? There are a couple of spots that we could probably put this. One spot that you could argue is this is information about a student. It's very much of the student's view of when are they expected to complete a course. So there's an argument that can be said to say, take all of this logic and move it to the student model. But I don't really think that that's a good choice for this particular time, partly because I've done that quite a bit already. So the student model is in danger of becoming, well, maybe it's already there. Student model is like almost 300 lines, and models, you expect them to have some data attributes on them, but the number of methods is growing beyond what I want. So that doesn't feel right. So maybe, and this is a pretty big design debate of like, where do you put business logic sometimes in Django apps? There's not a perfect answer. There's a lot of debate about this actually. And I think what I want to do is, this is the This logic is the confluence of a number of data models all merging together. It's really about the student, it's about the course, it's about all of their tasks for that course. And so this is feeling like something, a concept that needs to be represented in code as its own unique thing that I can call. So I think it's making me feel like maybe a forecaster is a concept that could exist that could answer these kind of questions about what are projected dates and such. And we could essentially refactor this method that you see here, this get task items, and put it in the forecaster. Take it out of the view, put it in the forecaster, and then put some good tests around that, and start to work towards how do we get the last date out of the forecaster for some of this stuff, which really might be the brute force way, and the way that seems reasonable to me is to say, call this get task items and then pluck off the last one. As wasteful as that seems, it may actually be a reasonable path to take, which I'm actually kind of liking as I say it out loud. So let's do that. So where's forecaster going to live? Forecaster, it's really, what's it about? It's about the school year itself, right? It's not about the course. I mean, it's kind of about the course, but only in a way. Well, I don't know. There's an argument to say it could be in the course too. You're getting me to design out loud, which I have to just talk through it sometimes. So I could see an argument to put the forecaster next to the courses app. And then this student view could use the course forecaster, maybe is a better name, and answer this question. The other spot could be in the school year, but as I'm looking at the data, the school year only really comes into play here. Well, I guess there's a couple of these corner cases. Okay. I could be wrong. I mean, look at all the places that it's actually used in this method. So where this is getting complicated and where this has a lot of logic is that in order to calculate the appropriate projected completion date, you have to factor in vacations. You have to factor in when is the school year running. There's a lot of data that is actually going into making this accurate. And all of this is, as I'm staring at this method for the last 5 minutes or whatever this has been, there's just a ton of stuff that's here, that's going into this computation. And yeah, so maybe the best place to capture all that is at the highest level where this is the most common. So the schools app is perhaps the best. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna put it in the schools app, and we'll go to schools, and we'll go back to the views and go up a level. And here's again where I said like business logic can go anywhere. And this is what people forget, is like we're working within Django. Django gives us models and views and all that good stuff. But this is also just Python. So there's no harm at all in making your own module. I do that on occasion. You can see one right here to do the calendar. There are areas where it makes sense to make a module for business logic. So we're going to do that today. So we're going to call this module forecaster. So it'll be forecaster.py. Hey, daily disclosure, welcome. We're working on a Django app feature here for my homeschool app. I don't believe I've seen your handle before. So if you're new joining, we work on a homeschool app that I'm building for my family. and we're doing some refactoring right now. So I've got some logic in a view, and it's pretty complicated logic. And so we're going to extract it from that view because I need to reuse it somewhere else in the app. So that's what's going on. So the very first thing I want to do, I guess, is create a class, if I can type it correctly. And we'll just call this class Forecaster. Oh, cool. Very good. I'm glad you're here. So the Forecaster, its job is going to be for projecting dates about school years and courses. That's what we care about. Start there. And so maybe the next step is to do what? How about a test case? That seems reasonable. So we'll go back to the test views file that we were at a moment ago, and we'll split this up and come up a directory and create a new file. We'll call it test forecaster. And we need to import the base test case that I use for my tests. So we're going to import test case, and then we'll do test forecaster. Like so. And for the moment, I'm going to say pass. Whoops. Capital C. There we go. So run that. There's no test. It should pass. Well, let's say it gave a no test message. The thing that I want to do is I'm going to start with a very mechanical change. I'm going to say, let's create an object that takes the student and course, like maybe trying to decide if the forecaster should accept a student and course as initialization parameters. In other words, like, should that go in the init method? Or if it should be just a dumb object to start that will take, is just kind of a wrapper for essentially what becomes kind of a function on it, because I believe, in fact, that's the way it's used in the view. It's none of that data that's passed into that method is actually stored on the view, to my knowledge. So we're going to have to, and then what I'd like to do is just take that logic out of the view and plop it in the forecaster. And then from there, go back to the view, refactor it to call the forecaster to pass in the same information. Make sure we don't break that existing view. That's important. We always have to be careful with these refactoring steps. But thankfully, I've got 100% test coverage on this app. So, that's how we're going to go about it. So we won't write any test for the forecaster yet. We'll start with giving ourselves something to test. Your app has 0% test coverage. Well, you can start today. PyTest is pretty great. You can add tests. In fact, I don't know if you're writing a Django app, but if you are, I think I did publish this one, right? I have a big long series on working with Django, and my most recent article that I published is this one. And I'll share it with the chat so that you can easily get to the link. And it's all about testing Django apps. It's about testing to general, like some principles about testing, but then it shows tests that you can add to your particular Django app that might help you out. So good luck with that. Hopefully it's a useful thing for you. Okay, we've got our forecaster here. Let's go back to the view, the students views, and here we are. And I'm going to look through this, and I've shrunk this down so far that we can't really see anything anymore. Let's resize this to be -20, because we'll spend most of our time looking at this for the moment. And what I'm going to look for in here is anything that it's saving to self. So we've got the self parameter on the method. So it is calling another one. It's calling this get coursework by task. Well, that's a little helper that's down here. But those are the only things that are in there. So really, both of these things can be lifted out of this view and dropped into the forecaster, I think. So put this back to where it was. And I think maybe that's the first step. I'm going to go like this. So we're not going to make an init method. So it's just going to be the forecaster. And we will come up to the top here and we'll say from, well, I guess it's going to go this line above, from homeschool.schools.forecaster import forecaster. And it's unused at the moment, which, no surprise, we haven't touched it yet. And the next thing I'm going to do is take this entire method and I'm going to drop it in the forecaster. So it's going to, all the problems are going to be there of things that's missing. It looks like it's missing time zone. So we can start by fixing the imports. So we'll say from Django utils import time zone. That's one of the ones that it's missing. So then it's going to go to the next one. So you're going to say, like, I don't know what this coursework by task is. So again, that was something that was only used by this view. So we can, that's going to move wholesale to this as well. And now we've got the coursework model here. And this is where, this is the part that I'm less sure about this move to school, the schools app, is coursework is a model that belongs to the student app. So I'm stepping into this recognition that I'm going to be pulling models from different apps together. And in the ideal world, you wouldn't have to do that. You wouldn't, like, every app could stand on its own and be completely independent. But there are integration points that happen. And so I think it's acceptable to sometimes opt into pulling data from other places. So I'm going to do that in this scenario. And we're going to say from homeschool.students.models import coursework to fix the import error. And this works well. This pattern can work well if you try and leave the models as leaves in your dependency hierarchy. So when you think about your app, there's a lot of code that's importing all over the place, right? And if your models are importing all over the place as well, then you can create this really deep knot of dependency problems. And so if you can treat your data models as things that don't import a ton of other stuff, then it can be safer to import them for use in this sort of way. It's a sort of a decoupling pattern. You want to avoid cycles as much as you can, import cycles and all of those sort of things. And so these are things that you have to wrestle with when you're designing some of these things. Anyway, so there's just something to consider. All right, the next step we're going to do, now that we've got our forecaster here, and as we've just, all we've done is copy it to a new place. So the next thing I want to do before deleting that view is find the place where get tasks items is used and replace it with the forecaster. So we're just going to swap out this call that is calling this view method for the same thing on the forecaster. And hopefully I've convinced you with this copying that we're really not doing anything fancy here. Where it's going to be calling the same code, it's just moved around to a different spot. And so I'm going to create a forecaster right here. And then we're going to say forecaster dot get task items. So same code basically. And now this is the part where we're going to do a sanity check. we're going to go to the test views. And remember, I have 100% test coverage on this. So anytime I'm doing one of these refactorings, if my tests break, then I've clearly identified a problem, but I don't think it's going to break, and it didn't. So the next thing we can do to further increase our confidence in here is to come into this course view and delete all this code. Like, we're not calling this anymore. This is now dead code. So we're going to delete it. And we're going to run the same test case. It should still pass. And it did. So we have successfully extracted these two methods out of the view and put them in the forecaster. And I think we're going to come up here and it looks like time zone is no longer used, so we can get rid of that import. So the action that we've just taken is helping to get business logic out of views. And I'm not going to beat you over the head and say it's bad to have business logic in your views. Clearly I do that myself. So it's about when you're thinking about where do you put your logic for your application, it really can be something that you can think of from an evolving point of view, is like to get your application started, to get this whole project off the ground. It doesn't make sense for me to, it didn't make sense, I should say, for me to overanalyze where does this code belong. Partly because I didn't understand the domain, the application domain for this project yet. So in putting that, in deciding too early, I would have potentially put the code in the wrong spot. And so I've kind of deferred the decision until I have a lot more information. And now I have a lot more information. I know that, hey, wait a minute, I actually need this projection code to be calculated in a couple of places. And I delayed that until it was prudent to have it in some common place. It is also an efficient way to get a bit of code done faster. And so, and the reason that I'm comfortable doing that is also because of my stance on testing. By having really robust tests, I know that in the event when I am ready to make this change, I have a really high degree of confidence that I did not break the whole system, because all I did was move a method, I moved it to a place, and then I was able to run all of my tests to convince myself and hopefully convince you that nothing broke. So that's pretty cool. So we're going to leave those tests alone. And in fact, there's at some point I probably will return to them. Or we may even do it tonight. Of those tests that are there might be the basis for what goes into the forecaster. In fact, let's take a look at that real quick, because we need to write some forecaster tests to keep that coverage around, and that student course view probably has the computation that we care about. Because let's look at where that view is. So the forecaster is down here, and so any of these tests that are calling on or checking the task items is probably something we want to factor in. Oh, interesting. This I'm also noticing there's some additional modification here. Well, maybe that doesn't matter for the forecaster. So this is saying there's a flag that's on that view that can show or hide some content based on the presence of this flag. So I don't think that really matters from the forecaster's perspective. The forecaster's job is still projecting out dates, and whether something is shown or not shown is immaterial to that. So I think that's okay. So what we're really interested in is looking for tests that touch this task items context and make sure that those are right. And so here's one that is well, that's not the right view. Is it? Sorry, y'all. And I've also I don't have the other part of streaming that's tricky is these are tiny little windows. I don't have a double monitor setup, so you are not getting the most full display here. So hopefully you can stare at these little tiny boxes with me and be okay with that. So we're looking for task items on the, oh, this is the right view. Student course, that's the right view, sorry. So anything that's touching these is probably what we care about. And just for the moment, let's give ourselves some more space so we can see this pretty clearly. And some of these are really, at this point, pretty old tests. I wrote this view quite a while ago. So here's the test case where it starts. In fact, let's just give ourselves a full view of what we're doing here. Here are all the tests. There's the happy path test. There's the permission check test. But here's where we start getting down to, okay, there's tests about today, and it's checking the specific context. So there's probably set up that we could refactor this test to move it to the forecaster. The other option is I can punt on all of this. Like, my code coverage story doesn't change here, and I'll prove it. So if I run the make coverage command, I'm still calling the Django view that is this student course view, and we're still running through the forecaster. So hey Stupak, welcome. Good to see you again, or good to see your handle. I don't actually know. I don't have any idea what you look like. But yeah, all of this test code is moving, shuffling test code around. It would probably be beneficial long term to logically know that the test code for the forecaster, where that is, it would be better for that to be by the forecaster. But it's not critical. It's not a requirement. So maybe the test that we want to write for the forecaster tonight are more about the stuff that we want to put in this forecast report, right? So just proving that this should come out as 100%. It did, great. So still have the same amount of coverage. Okay. So let's not move these tests. That just seems like a bunch of grunt work that, y'all, it's boring. It's boring for me to think about it. To have to stream it is probably even more so. So now we now have a tool, a new tool that we didn't have previously. The view that had the logic that we cared about is now no longer, that logic is no longer locked away in the view. It's now in this forecaster object that we can apply to this new view, this forecast view. And the thing that we need to feed this forecaster to get the dates that we care about are students and courses, right? So the test we might want to write to position ourselves to write the forecast view is how do we get the last date? That's really what this forecast view is all about, showing, here are the courses, here's when it's expected to end. That's really it. So I think that is the sensible test to write for the forecast, for this new method that we need to add to the forecaster. So let's go back to the test forecaster file, which has nothing in it. Let's also bring up the forecaster itself. Whoops, I totally messed up typing that. Forecaster, there we go. So I'm going to take the stupid approach, or what I think is a stupid approach. Maybe it's actually not that stupid. Is this thing returns a list of task items. So to get the last thing, okay, well, just take the last item on the list and pull out the date. Done, right? So let's write that test. Let's see. So def last, what's a good, now here's the harder part. What's the good method name? The get last projected date, get last forecast date. I don't know. Yeah, that's probably okay. And we can say the forecaster returns the final date of a course, final projected date. And I like writing these doc strings to give myself some hope of understanding what my test is really about in the future. Sometimes the test names can feel sufficient, but what I have found is that future me always regrets not having doc strings. Like I said earlier in the stream, I'm kind of kicking myself for not having this. It seems kind of obvious, but then there's like 40 lines of code in here, and I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? Putting that much code in there with no documentation about what it's trying to do. So this is our test. There's nothing in it. It's going to pass. Oh, I didn't save it. So it should pass. It's empty. So we can test this out by testing what's the happy path. The happy path here is yes, yeah. The happy path here is got a student in a course, and the course has 2 tasks. Does the last forecast date return the date of that last task? Are they the same? They should be. So I think that's the test we want to try. So I want to create a student that's in a particular school year. The easiest way to do that is to create an enrollment. So here's where I bring up the trusty model diagram. And some of you have probably seen this, others have not. So I haven't spent a lot of time on the stream explaining some of the modeling, but this enrollment ties together a student with a school year. And you can trace how it does that, but that's the thing that you need to know at this moment is the enrollment, and we'll get a student and a school year connected. So we can use an enrollment factory to get an appropriate student and the appropriate school year, that are all connected. So that's what we're going to do. And the enrollment factory is in the students app. So we'll say from, whoops, I guess that goes above, from homeschool students tests factories, import enrollment factory. And we'll add an enrollment, which will create an appropriately connected student to a school year. Wires all that up for us. And we can extract so the student is attached as a foreign key, so we can do this. And since we're going to use the student, let's put it out into a local variable for the moment. And we also need a course, and we need a course task. These are the pieces of data that are all going to combine together. So from homeschool courses tests factories, we want the course factory, and we want the course task factory. Those are the bits that we'll need. And so the first thing to do is, here's the course, and the course is going to be, it's connected via a grade level. And a grade levels is actually a many-to-many key. So we need to wrap it in kind of a silly way, like this. So don't worry about too many of these details. Like, this is just my knowledge of the domain that I'm solving at this point. And we're just setting up some data. And so I'm just filling in the gaps. And we need 2 tasks. So the first one, I don't care about the task itself. So we'll say course task factory, and it takes a course. But we do care about the second task, because the second task is going to have the date that we want. Although I guess we should probably make sure that the dates are different, because they're going to try and, well, no, they're not. Never mind. the scheduler should figure out that they should be in sequence, so they should automatically be on different days. So now we've got, I think we have all the bits that we need. Well, I guess we're missing the one crucial element. We're missing the forecaster. Okay. And the forecaster is in the schools app. So from homeschool, schools, forecaster, import forecaster. And this is where we're going to do some test-driven development. This method doesn't exist yet. So we'll say last date is equal to forecaster get last forecast date. And I'm going to pass it the same arguments, the student and the course, that come from the get task list, because those are the critical bits that we need. And then we want to assert what? Well, shoot. Now I'm putting this all together, I'm reminded of things, that the way that this projection is working is by calculating, is the school year started, and if not, use the today. So the date calculation is not going to be something that we can just quickly pull. So well, how will we know that we have the right date? That's going to be interesting. But let's just see if we can get the date out first, and then we'll back into the solution, because I kind of conceptually know the date. Like the school year started, and it's starting from today, which it's trying to do. Then the calculation of the date should be like, if there are two tasks, there's one that could be done today, and then the next one should be done tomorrow in my head. I think that's not entirely true the way I've written this test. There's assumptions that in there that you probably aren't aware of. For instance, the default for all of my course and school year is to run 5 days a week. So my tests would blow up on like a Saturday or Sunday because they'd be off by 2. So there's like calculation in there to figure out, like, don't count the weekends and weird stuff like that. If you ever write an app, scheduling's hard. Just be aware that you're in for a pretty big headache of all these like different little corner cases that are going to bite you. But that's what I signed up for when I decided to make an app for my wife about scheduling. So let's see if we can, let's just print out the last date so we can get something, and then we'll have our test fail. So we'll just say assert false. That's guaranteed to fail. And so it's going to fail already because it doesn't have that method yet. So there's step number 1. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, this is, as I'm considering the return values, it's also causing me to think of like, what other tests, what are the, we can get the happy path stuff, but what are the edge cases that are going to happen here? The most obvious one that's going to happen is, what if there are no tasks? There's nothing to return. There's no date to provide. So what's going to happen when there's no date? So test, we'll say no tasks to forecast. And I'm going to leave that there as just a reminder of there's another scenario that I need to consider when I write this method of there has to be a reasonable return. What's it going to be? So let's see, let's come up here, and we've got our primary get task items method that supports the student course view. That's going to drive a lot of this. And that is a list that is going to be returned at the end. This thing right here is actually a private method, but I didn't mark it as that. So let's do that little refactoring quickly to change it to that. And I'm just adding an underscore for it. And it just tells me, it's just a signal to me that I wasn't using previously, that this is not used by anything else. Haven't been really good about that, but I'd like to get better about it. So I'm just adding that there to remind me. From my perspective, this last forecast date, it sort of sits on top of get task items. Get task items is an implementation detail. So from a reader's perspective, I like to put the implementations below. And what I mean by that is if you read enough code, and Python itself doesn't care about your method order. So whether you define methods high or low and they call each other, none of that really matters to Python, because Python is going to compile the bytecode together first and scan through the file. And there are scenarios where you can screw it up and get things to have order matter. But on class methods or methods that are on a class, not actual class methods, the order typically doesn't matter. So there are a couple schools of thought of ways to tackle that. One school says, I've got my public methods and I want to see all the implementation above it so that by the time I get to the actual public method that's on display, that I understand how all that was built. That's one view. Another view says, I want to have my high-level thing at the top and then have all of my implementation methods be below it. I definitely am of the school of thought for that latter idea. And the reason that I argue for that, and you can argue differently, but this is my argument for doing that, is that if I'm thinking about a method, the whole purpose of object-oriented programming, well, not the whole purpose, but a big purpose of it is to model encapsulation and have abstractions. And what is the point of an abstraction if you have to fit all the implementation details into your head before you're allowed to consider a method? So from my point of view, start with the most abstract methods first. And then if you need to drill into the details to understand more, then okay, go for it. Go find, okay, I'm using, this method is using this method below it. Now I understand that one, and maybe that's good enough. So that is why in my philosophy, I want to put the higher level methods above it. So I'm going to follow that guidance here, and we're going to put our get last forecast date right here. And we're going to take the same exact parameters, because it's really going to be mostly a pass-through to this other method. And let's give it a method, and we're going to say, or a doc string, I should say, and we'll say get the last forecast date of a course for the student. And it seems very repetitive, but if you ever generate documentation, this stuff does end up being helpful. Like your editors can inform you, and your brain can just process this stuff. And sometimes, especially, I don't know what is not to be like a non-native English speaker reading English, but I would hope that reading an English sentence, if you've been taught English, is easier than reading a method name. I could be totally wrong on that. Maybe that's certainly my English bias shining through. So the first test that we're going to do is we're just going to call the other method. So we're going to pass it to all of that computation below. And it's going to return a thing. And that's not what we want to return. We want to return a single date. So what we need to do is go into here and find where is that date stored. And so this is a list. It is a list of task items, and I'm defining task item as this dictionary structure. So what goes in there? Well, by default, there's actually not even the date. There's only those two fields. And so the answer is actually even a little bit more complicated than we might think. So there's a date when it was actually completed. So let's say, so there's actually another test here that we need to write. So test all tasks completed. That's going to be another one that's going to pop up. So we want to show when we want to show a date that makes sense, and the coursework has a date. So if you don't, the modeling I confess I'm not showing you all of, but the modeling has a date, and the coursework is a way to say it's a way to say that this task has been completed by a student, and here is when they did it. So I don't remember the actual field name. It's probably completion date or something like that. But that's tied to this coursework model that can be put in there. And then if it's not completed, though, that's when it calculates this plan date for this expected completion, which is the happy path that we're considering. So we're in this first test that we're thinking about, we're trying to calculate a completion date for a student that has done no work on this course yet. So it's like the beginning of the school year. It should represent the last date that matters. So coming back to the forecaster itself, we're going to assume some things to start. So I'm going to assume that we can pull out the last task item. I'm not even going to think about the fact that there might be 0. We're going to write that other test in the future. So we've got that. We'll say it's task items. Oops. And the easiest way to do this in Python is to say use the negative indexing, and that gives you the last item. And this only works if you have a list that has size. So this will, right now, in the case where there's no tasks, it will raise an index error if there's a problem. But that's not what we care about. And I realized I made that plural. So we've got a single task item. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that the planned date is the thing that's going to happen. And I know by looking at the implementation that that's the case. So what we want to do for the moment is we want to return the task item planned date. And this is the naive solution. This will definitely break in real world usage because we're not factoring in a lot of stuff. But I'm hopeful that this will at least give us a date to see on this test. So we should fail at the assertion, but we'll see the date. And I'm looking at this, and it's saying 12. That's interesting. So today is March the 10th at the time of this recording, and it's saying March the 12th. Curious. Why is that? That seems like not what I would anticipate. I would expect there to be probably the 11th. Like we have today. This today has not expired. Although maybe it's expired from UTC perspective. Tricky. So does localization factor in? Oh, fudge. I don't know how deep I want to get into that or how much I care. Because I probably do care. Shoot. Well. So here's where the trouble comes in, perhaps. So we're calling local date. And I'll let Vim. Is Vim going to show me? There it is. Yeah. Okay. So y'all can see, hopefully, this little message here. And it says local date. What it does is it takes a time if you provide it, and it converts a date time into a date object. And the reason I'm using time zone is time zone from the Django utils factors in, and instead of dealing with naive date times, it deals with real date times that have a time zone attached to them. But my project has UTC set as the default date time. Here, I think I'm not worried about this though. I think this is going to be okay, and I think I can explain why. I have a project pulled into this that is that figures out a user's time zone. And shoot, what's the project called? Here it is, Django Tz Detect. Pretty cool little project. Wonder if it's still in my search history. We'll find out. Let's go check it out for a second. So what Django Tz Detect does is it detects your time zone. Imagine that. And there's a little bit of JavaScript that's sprinkled into your app. And when a page loads, it will do, it will call the browser's time object. Somehow there's something that it does that it from where the person's browser is, it will execute a little bit of code and say, okay, I figured out that Matt is in the Eastern time zone of the United States. And then it will post that to an endpoint on the Django backend and set it for that particular session, I believe. I think it stores it in session data. I'm not exactly positive on all the inner workings about it, but you can go read it. And so it's not perfect, but the effect is that when I ask for a date for my app, I'm going to get one that is localized to the user's time zone, which I think is pretty awesome. I just want to check something and make sure I'm not talking crazy. Yeah. So because I'm using Tz Detect, all of that stuff is figured out. So that means that even though my calculator here just reported back to me that the answer was March the 12th, which is 2 days from the literal date of this recording, that is a sensible thing because Tz Detect does not apply in my tests. So UTC is the time, and UTC is 4 or 5 hours ahead of me. I never remember because of daylight savings time, stupid United States. So it's in the future and it's in tomorrow. So my original projection about what I expected the date to be for this forecaster is accurate. It's not, the task is not being done today, but it's being done for day +1. And so that's the date of last date that I expect. Okay, so the question now is, what do we have to modify about the test to actually make last date pass? So the first thing I'm going to do is cement it in time. I think that's step 1. So this is going to be something that varies based on the time. And we have, I have freeze gun as a tool that can freeze time. And it's, obviously it's not really freezing time. That'd be pretty darn cool for some code to do. But what it does is it kind of intercepts calls to date time and fakes the clock and says like, well, don't worry about what time it really is. Here's the time that I'm going to tell you it is. And that is effectively a stub for this function call right here. So when we call local date, we can pin it to whatever date we want it to be. And what I want to do is pin it to a time. I guess probably pinning it to a literal this day is probably fine. So we'll do that. So we'll come down to the test and we're going to say from freeze gun import freeze time. And that is a decorator that we add to the test. I'm trying to think if we want to add it to the whole test case. Probably not. Let's do it just one test at a time. So we'll say freeze time and we'll give it today's date. And today is 2021 and 0310. And I think what that'll do, and I guess, yeah, this is going to be helpful in the future to say this was a Wednesday. Hopefully what that'll do is change the answer that came back from last date to be the 11th. Because, yep, and it did. Good, great. Because what is implied with this 310 is actually the 0th second. So it's, regardless of UTC, all that stuff goes out the window. So I'm not getting an answer of what UTC thinks it is now. I'm just getting an answer of pick this particular date and time. And so what we care about is we want, since we've frozen time and we've got 2 tasks, I can pick the expected date. So I can say expected last date. It's going to be equal to date time, date, and then 2021 3/11, I believe. Okay, and then I guess we don't really need this task for the assertion. And we can say last date is equal to expected last date. Hopefully the test passes. Yay. All right. So I'm looking at the time. We're most certainly not going to get to that view tonight. We're kind of, hopefully you've seen like a bunch of the aspects of what I'm doing here. Some refactoring, make sure that this code works in multiple places, positioning ourselves for this forecast view when we get there, and providing the necessary methods to make that, to power that view. The bits that we need to do next are set up test data for more specific scenarios. And that's what's essentially, excuse me, starting to get a little tongue-tied, which maybe is a sign I'm getting tired. But the way that I want to finish off this method, most likely, is to do a couple of things. One is answering the scenario when there is no date. There's no coursework, there's no plan date, because there's no tasks at all. I think we have to have an answer there. And so the answer, maybe the best answer is to, since it's a no date scenario, we need to be able to say the answer is none. And I really am not wild about making methods that return none. So the other option is to raise an exception. So the question is that something that I think is truly exceptional? And the truth is probably not. Like, it's probably really something that is a reality. Because there will be plenty of times where somebody is wanting to look at the forecast and they have created a course and haven't put any tasks in there. So it's a pretty reasonable thing to say that's not an exception scenario, and you just need to be planning for it. So that's pushing me more and more towards, even though I'm not crazy about them, we need to make this view, or this method, return none. Now, thankfully though, I use MyPy, which is a type checking tool. And MyPy, for the challenges that it has, MyPy, if you're not aware, is static type checking. And so Python, you can add optional type checks to your code. And I have found this to be abundantly useful for this exact scenario that we're about to describe. Because if you've been coding in Python a lot, you'll see, well, let's give an example of this classic exception. So not a list, so we'll say not a list is equal to none. And then we'll say not a list, and we'll index to 0. Okay, so you've seen variants of this particular error all over the place. So either and the variant that I'm talking about is none type errors, where it's a type error. None type is not subscriptable in this case, or not a list dot foo. None type has no attribute, blah, 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 whatever. None type errors are a pain in the butt. They're a reality of a language that has none, and Python is one such language. There are languages that don't give you none, that you may force you into other patterns for dealing with cases that don't have answers. We don't have those tools available to us. This is not Rust or something like that. But we do have the static type checker. And what that can do for us is we can change this to put a type check on here. And by putting the type check on here, we can make it so that if we don't type check, if we don't test for none, then the type checker will complain and say like, wait a minute, you use the chunk of code, but the return value could be a none. So you're going to step on a landmine if you don't check this thing. And that's the value of MyPy in this scenario. So we'll add some type stuff here to make this work. So I'm going to add student, and I'm going to go, we're going to also need the course model for the type check as well. So homeschool, courses, models, import course. And from, what else are we going to need? We're going to need date time. And from the typing module, we're going to need optional. And all of these bits are going to go into making our type check. So now we're going to come here and we're going to put colon student after the argument and colon course. So so we're actually improving not just the return value, but also the inputs as well, that MyPy can keep us honest. So if we ever are passing in something that is not a student or not a course, it will correct us and say like, hey, wait a minute, you did something that you said shouldn't happen. So there's a bunch of value to MyPy, which is it's a pretty cool tool. So then we can put in optional date time dot date, which is what we expect. So what optional is saying is there's this concept in typing. I'll just type it right here. So there's a concept in type checking called a union. And a union is a type that says a value can be of multiple different types. So if I wrote down a union of stir and int, that means that a variable could be either a string or an integer. Union's kind of a weird misnomer because like when I think of the word union, I think of two things merged together, but I think it's drawing from a C heritage of what a union means, which just means like it can be one of a number of things. It can fit in this type. So that's what a union is. So if we've got optional is really a fancy way of saying union with the none as one type and whatever your type happens to be. So I'm calling it T here. So in our example above, where we've said optional date time, so our optional date is the same thing as the union of none and date. I hope that makes sense to you all. If you have questions about that, I'm not going to stick around for too much longer, but this is what's going on. And so when I say optional date on the chunk of code above, when MyPy, this tool, runs, it scans all the code and looks at all of the usage and does the analysis of the abstract syntax tree and can figure out and infer based on the methods of, you've said that this thing is going to be optional. And then, it finds a chunk of code where you've said it's going to be optional, but without checking for none, you have directly indexed into it, as like in my earlier example with the not a list thing. And so MyPy will throw an error and say like, wait a minute, you need to, if you want this code to be safe and not blow up on you in runtime potentially, then you need to actually guard against that and only do that indexing if you've wrapped it in if my variable is not none or some kind of guard like that. And it's at that point that MyPy will stop complaining. So all of the type checking stuff that's there is a safety net. And this is why people, a lot of people will really praise statically typed languages, because this kind of constraints, these constraints are forced on you all the time. The reason that I like Python's model is if you look at most of my code, I'm not type checking everything. I could, and I do at work when we have, my job has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines of Python code, so you really benefit on those big mega projects from having all of that type checking stuff to keep everybody honest on a big team. But for me, I really only like adding the type checking in these smaller scenarios where I feel like it's really adding a lot of value and saving me from big mistakes that I could make in the future. So now we've got this optional date time here, and it's also declaring the intent of the method, so that if there is no date that's in the task item, it's okay for me to return none because it's an expected value on the other side. So I think now we're well positioned to write this next test now that we've adjusted the type annotation, which is the name for those little attributes that you add, is a type annotation. And we're ready to write this second test. So what I'm gonna do here is copy this test completely, and we'll say no tasks returns a last date of none. That's really what we're after. So the step to do this is delete the tasks, and we're going to take out the expected last date, and then we're going to say last date is none. And in the current implementation, this should blow up, right? Because we're going to get that subscript error because we're trying to index into a list that won't be there, or it will be empty or something. Yeah, it's out of range. Sorry, it's not a subscript error. It's just, there's nothing there. So the way to correct this is we want a guard clause. So if not, and a guard clause is essentially an early return statement that protects later code from running. And I'll show you the two different versions that you could do for this. One is not a guard clause and one is. So this is the guard clause version. So it says, like, if there are no task items, then the only choice is to return none. And that is the, oops, I didn't actually save that file. Okay. That's the scenario that makes this work. There's no longer a safety problem. It's not going to index into a list that doesn't exist, or it doesn't have size. This is called a guard clause because it prevents prevents later on code from executing. The other way to do this that is a non-guard clause pattern is to flip this around and say something more like, if task items, then do this, else, or let it fall through the bottom, return none. So this is another way you could do it. But notice, I don't know if you noticed it, but here's what happened in that process, is that the actual logic that we cared about got indented by one step. So the nice part about guard clause pattern and this early return is that it reads very vertically, very linearly, versus, like, you know, imagine now if we had other checks in here. So let's say if A, then we would have else, you know, return none. Well, look at that. We're now at 2 levels of indentation, and now you can see how this is going to go. So we've got if B, then we have 3 levels of indentation, and you start to get the what do they call it in JavaScript, where you have a series of callbacks? Nesting of doom or something like that is the kind of the name that where it's starting to make this wedge shape where the actual logic that you care about is so far to the right on your code that it's kind of painful to read. We're gonna back this out and look at the same version if it was just guard clauses. And I think you'll hopefully agree with me that it's much nicer. So now imagine the same scenario. This is a equivalent in functionality code. Now we can have if A, return none, if B, return none. And so what you're left with in this version with guard clauses is this nice, clean, your eye follows right down the line and works out really well. So there's a design pattern that I'm a big fan of, guard clauses, and that's what that's doing. So we've got the next test here that is what we care about. And then we have a third scenario where the task, callback hell is kind of the name. There's a specific, it has doom in it. JavaScript, this is where we get dangerous from doing Google searches. JavaScript, callback, pyramid of doom. I'm going to search for that. That seems close. Somebody's surely called it that. Yeah, it's the pyramid of doom, where it's just like, boom, all you see is this like sideways pyramid thing that's just horrible. And your ability to reason about that kind of code it gets pretty painful. Okay, last test. So we'll say the last date matches the coursework completion. So this is the scenario where the student is done. They have a task, but their task is already done. So let's put this in here. Take the same test from beginning. We don't care about having two tasks. That's not really super important because we already have a check that gives us the confidence that the two task scenario works. That's up above. And so what we want to do is we want to create a coursework, and then the last date is going to match the coursework date. So let's come in here and let's come up to the top, and we need the Coursework Factory now, which is in the students' factories. So Coursework Factory, and the Coursework Factory takes, what does it take? It takes a task and it takes a student. I think it calls it a course task. So we want to add Coursework Factory, and we're going to give it the student, and we're going to give it the course task. And I believe if I run this, we're going to get a key error because the plan date won't be there, coursework will be there, so it should error. Yep. So there's no plan date to calculate. So we have to rely on the coursework, which means we have to inspect this task item. So we already know that it's safe to pull out the task item. So we have a real task item here. Now we're just checking on the actual attributes of it. So the thing that I want to do is a key check. So if there is a planned date in the task item, then that was that first scenario when the task hasn't happened yet. We want to return that. And then else, otherwise, we want to pull out the, well, I don't know that we need to pull out the coursework, but really what we're after is the task item coursework, I think is what we called it below. And I believe it's completed date. Yeah. All right, cool. There's a thing I'll comment on here. Well, maybe it's necessary. So the problem, some of the stuff is actually used for the actual view context. So views are going to access some of these parameters. So dictionaries are helpful. But there's an argument to be said that this data, this task item, we're doing what you might call primitive obsession, where we're using a dictionary to represent something that actually has a modeled concept here. And maybe it should be something more. But at the same time, it also has some variability of what that dictionary structure can be based on some certain stuff, which is why we're having to do this checking. So I think this is going to be the right solution. Let's run the test. Yeah. Okay, so in that scenario, what had happened was the get task items stuff calculated. It got down here and said, oh, I actually found a coursework that this task belongs to, that this user did. And that's because we use this Coursework Factory to associate a student with a chunk of work. And because of that, it sets the coursework in there. That coursework, as a reminder, is the work that tracks when the student actually did the stuff. So it has a completion day. And so what we did is we pulled out the completed date out of that thing and returned that as the final answer. So it's still going to give us an accurate projection, but it's just after everything's done. So it's like, well, there's nothing else to project. The task is done. The student is done with this course, but it still represents the ending of the course. It's the last date in the course from the student's point of view. So I think that completes the method in its entirety. It feels a little brute force-ish because, as I'm looking at this, there is a lot of stuff in between. A course can have easily hundreds of tasks on the school year. My children are in school year-round. We take breaks, like weeks off, but we don't have a full summer. So, we might have a little bit more school than the average school year of like 9 months. And if you just do the math, let's say there's 10 months that we're doing and 30 days. Well, we're not, I guess. How many days would that be? I guess if there's average of 4 weeks in a month and 5 school days, that's really only 20. So, okay, a very full course could have something like 200 activities in it. And that seems pretty wasteful. Like if all we're doing is calculating all of that stuff of all of the completion dates and looking through every single one and how many of them had coursework and all of this information just to pop off the last one and get the date out of that. It seems, like I said, wasteful. But I think the truth is, when we dug into this method earlier, which some of you might not have been on the stream earlier, there's actually a lot that goes into calculating, is that appropriate? And you have to go through all the dates. You have to look at every task and say, is today a holiday? Is today an actual day that the course is running? Is today a day that the school year is running? And so there's a ton of variables that are coming into this to bring this information together. So while it might be wasteful, it seems appropriate. And maybe there's ways that I can optimize it, but here's the other thing. It's like, I don't want to optimize it. And, it's not that I want a website to be slow, but the truth is, we humans, are really bad at estimation and optimization and determining what is fast and what is slow. So while I think that this might be slow, the reality is that it could turn out to be so insignificant in the scheme of things that it's totally fine to do. There's a little bit of CPU processing here, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. And in the of that future where I was wrong, because again, we're bad at estimating, then we come in here and we optimize it. We've got a nice method around it, and we've got the data that we need. So we could optimize it if we needed to. All right, that's where I'm going to stop for tonight. I've gone on for 2 hours and been doing a lot of talking. My plan next time, I don't know if it'll be on stream or not, is to take this particular get last forecast date method, take it to the new view that we built out that has nothing in it yet, and go query for all the data that we required, all of the information about the students, all the courses they're in, and smash it all together and basically generate a report that says, here's every course. Here's its last date. That's my plan. We'll write tests about it. We'll design it, make it look nice, and so on. This content's going to go up on YouTube. If there's anything you missed that you want to refer back to, please do. If you are over on YouTube and checking it out later, please give me a thumbs up or a like or subscribe or whatever it is you want to do over there. That does help out, and you'll also be notified of when these recordings go live in case you want to catch up on one later and don't join me every week. So I hope you learned something this evening. I talked through a lot of design thoughts as well as actually just doing Django stuff. So hope you found that valuable. And with that, I'll bid you all adieu. Good night.